Hey everyone, welcome to another video. So in this video, we'll try and understand 5 significant GST checks or checkpoints that you may consider fulfilling or doing before this financial year end, which is basically 31st March 2026. Now we are currently sitting in financial year 25-26, and this financial year has really witnessed some significant GST changes, whether it is with GST 2.0 or with some important Supreme Court, High Court rulings which have changed the course of GST, or whether it is with some small budget changes in 2026. Because of all these changes, there's a need for every small, medium, and big businesses to really amend their agreements with suppliers, with the customers, to strengthen their controls, their internal controls as well as IT controls, and to constantly have training sessions to update themselves with GST compliances. So therefore, in this particular video, we'll do a deep dive and understand 5 such GST checkpoints that you may consider fulfilling before 31st March 2026. And the first one, like we have here, is filing of an LUT application for financial year 26-27, the next financial year. Now, this is quite relevant for those in the business those in the export business, exporting out goods or services outside the country, or even supplying goods or services to a special economic zone or a special economic unit. And that is filing of an LUT. Now, LUT is basically an online application. It hardly takes 5 to 10 minutes for you to fill and submit the LUT, and it is an auto-approved form, which basically means that today if I file an LUT, then within a couple of days it'll be auto-approved. Now, what is the objective use of this LUT? For those involved in the business of exporting goods or services or supplying to special economic zone units, there is no requirement to charge GST on the sale invoices. So you raise an invoice for the export of goods or services, or you raise an invoice for supply to special economic zone units. There's no requirement for you to charge GST on the invoice. And for you to do this, you need to file an LUT before you make the first export or the first supply to a special economic zone unit. So file an LUT before 31st March 2026 so that you have the privilege of raising invoices without GST from 1st April 2026 onwards. This is the first major checkpoint. The second one is quite important, and that is matching of sales or your outward supplies between what is appearing in what you accounted for in the books of accounts and what is appearing in GSTR 1 or GSTR 3B. So basically matching books and GST returns. So a three-way reconciliation is important. One, between what you have accounted for in your financial system or in your books of accounts. Number two, with GSTR 1, which is the return where you show the GST sales, so the outward supplies. And GSTR 3, which is basically the return where you finally calculate how much of GST that you have to pay, your output minus input, final net liability or net GST that you have to pay. So do a three-way reconciliation between what is appearing in books, what is appearing in the GSTR 1, GSTR 3B, and this becomes all the more important to be done before 31st March 2026, so you can find out whatever sales has been overbooked or underbooked and make amendments or changes accordingly. The third one is also a matching check that is to be done, and this is again important because it relates to GST credits, the most talked about portion in the entire GST law, GST ITC. And this reconciliation that I'm talking about is between what is appearing in your books and what is appearing in your GSTR 2B. Now, GSTR 2B on your GST portal is a auto-populated return that basically carries figures of your suppliers. So when your suppliers are filing returns, that is basically your purchases, they will be filing returns and their GST portions and all that will come and sit in your GSTR 2B. So you'll have a first-hand view of whatever is the GST credits or GST amount that you purchased, that you paid on your purchases, and the credits of which you can avail subsequently. So when you see a particular amount of GST credit in your GSTR 2B, let's say rupees 200 for a particular supplier or vendor, and for that same supplier, you only got an invoice for rupees 100. Now, you would only account for rupees 100 in your books of accounts on the day you receive the invoice. So if you received invoice, make sure that you have received the goods or you have received services from the vendor, and you are recommended or it is suggested that you account for on the same day in your books of accounts. So if only 100 is appearing in your books of accounts, which basically means it relates to a particular invoice or the actual delivery of goods or receipt or services, but 200 is appearing in your GSTR 2B, then you will not go ahead and avail the full 200 in your GSTR 3B. You will only avail what is appearing in your books because that is what you accounted. If you have not accounted for an extra 100, that's a different case. But if you only got an invoice for rupees 100 GST credit I'm talking about, and 200 of the credit is appearing in your GSTR 2B, then only 100 is what you carry forward to be used in GSTR 3B for the set off against your sales GST and final GST to be paid. So a reconciliation between whatever is appearing in your GSTR 2B versus whatever appearing in your whatever you accounted for in your books is to be done. Ideally, minimum of the two will have to be disclosed in GSTR 3B for further utilization of against the output tax liability. This is the third check. The fourth one is about e-invoicing. Now, the provisions of e-invoicing state that for all business to business supplies, if your business has made in any preceding financial year, right from 2017-18 when GST came into picture, till 2025-26, in any preceding financial year, if your aggregate turnover of the business, that is basically taxable, non-taxable, exempt, whatever kinds of GST supplies are included in this particular definition of aggregate turnover, and if that has crossed the 5 crore limit mark, then you are supposed to generate an e-invoice. You are not supposed to only disclose the sales in your GSTR 1 and 3B from your books. Ideally, you are supposed to generate an e-invoice, and then that figure goes and sits in your GSTR 1 and GSTR 3B final payment of GST. So for any business achieving an aggregate turnover in any preceding year, right from 17-18 till the last financial year, which is basically 25-26, and if that turnover limit crosses 5 crore, then e-invoicing is mandatory. So this is one check that you need to do before 31st March 26. You need to really take up your sales for 25-26 and see whether you have crossed the threshold limit of 5 crores. If in any of the preceding financial years you have not crossed the threshold limit, if you have crossed, then starting from 1st April 2026, all your GST sales will be through the e-invoicing module. This is the fourth one. And the final one is with respect to the payments to vendors. In fact, I made a video on this a couple of weeks back where under GST, there's a requirement to pay the vendors within 6 months or 180 days, because if you don't pay within 180 days, then whatever GST credits that you're availed at the time of purchase, when you got an invoice, you record in your books, in your 2B it has come, you're availed in your 3B. So at the time of purchase invoice, you had recorded the GST credit, you've availed and utilized the same, but it happens so that in 6 months time, you have not made a payment to the vendor, even though the credit period is more than 6 months between you and your vendor. If you have not made the payment within 6 months, then you ought to reverse the ITC in your subsequent, or the GST credit in your subsequent GSTR 3B, and pay that with tax, with interest to the government. So an important check that you must do before 31st March 2026 is to find out what is the creditors aging and to find out if any payment is still due to the vendors, and if so, if that is exceeded 180 days, then you need to reverse it. And in the 7th or the 8th month, when you pay the vendor the GST amount plus the taxable value, then you can retake or re-avail the input tax credit. So there's no total blockage. Yes, you need to reverse once you exceed the 180-day limit, but in the 182nd day or the 183rd day, if you're making the full payment to the vendor, then on that day or for that return relevant to that particular month, you can retake or re-avail your input tax credit. Now, another one to note is that most of the vendors today are MSME registered. So you need to check whether the vendors you deal with have an MSME registration. If so, there's a requirement to pay them within 45 days. So definitely within 45 days means that this check of 1 days will automatically be catered to, because you need to satisfy this 45-day rule, which is otherwise mentioned in the MSME Act, which if you don't comply with, then the MSME vendors can come after you. So this vendor payment check within 1 days is something that you must do before 31st March 2026. And therefore, the burden of proof for any GST registered person is directly proportional to the GST compliance in today's scenario. And with a lot of information technology, AI and other tech tools being used by the department, you have notices under GST flying in every random day, which takes away and diverts a lot of attention and time which otherwise could be spent on a particular business by a particular businessman. So instead of a small or a medium businessman focusing on the business, today he's behind replying to GST notices, behind some demand or some GST liability that has come up, or some issue that has happened in GSTR 1 or GSTR 3B, which otherwise could have been avoided if proper checks or proper compliances are met before the financial year end. And this financial year end is, of course, 31st March 2026. And it is important that these 5 checks are kept in mind and fulfilled before this financial year end. Well, I hope I was able to make things clear in this particular video. If you like the video, you could show support to us by hitting the like button. If you want more videos of these on regular basis through web notifications, you could also think of hitting the subscribe button. Till then, I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care and thank you.